Good afternoon. My name is Dustin Dupas, Chief Operating Officer at Tabs Analytics. Welcome to our September webinar, the 2017 5th Annual Food and Beverage Consumables Study. We'll be reviewing channel and consumer trends in key food and beverage categories, including a detailed look at online grocery, both in the US and UK. Our next webinar will be our first ever households category study, where we'll do a deep dive into several different categories, including laundry detergent, consumer tissue, disposable tableware, household cleaners, and air fresheners. Be sure to join us back for this presentation on Wednesday, October 18th at 2 p.m. Eastern. You can check our website at tabsanalytics.com next week for that webinar sign up. As a reminder, we always make these webinars available online at webinars.tabsanalytics.com. Usually we get these posted by the next day after the webinar presentation. Presenting today is Dr. Kurt Jetta, CEO and founder of Tabs Analytics. At the end of the presentation, we'll open the floor to questions that you could submit on the question box on your GoToWebinar screen. With that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Jetta.
Thank you, Dustin, and thank you to all of you attending today, and just wanted to extend my apologies for having to reschedule. I'm down in Delray Beach, Florida, and we were evacuated out for Irma, so that obviously created a little bit of disruption in the old workflow. But today I'm going to go through the study, and I'm just going to preface it a little bit because we have a little more content than we normally do. There's sometimes I'm going to have to brush through some of the explanations, for example, describing the different promotional tactics. You can always get a fuller explanation either on the question and answer period, or you can get on, as what Dustin said, looking at prior webinars at webinars.tabsanalytics.com. Just as we do all these studies, the primary data source is a general population survey of 1,000 adults. We've done the same thing for the last 5 years, and then we weight toward age and gender to get aligned with the national census. The key areas of questioning are talking about getting purchase frequency of the top 15 consumables categories that represent about 20% of CPG retail, and we're looking at these categories as a proxy for the health of online or for grocery overall, just because they're high frequency, high penetration. We also ask about the top 10 deal tactics they use, such as circulars, FSIs, bonus packs, private label, etc. What's people's agreements on 3 on-trend or trendy topics, and then where do they buy these products regularly? And we don't ask specific grocery banners, so we're not asking Kroger versus Stop and Shop, etc., just traditional food outlets in general. We conduct internal validity tests as well as quite extensive external industry corroboration. So when we make a conclusion based on survey data, particularly if it's out of line with either conventional wisdom or prevailing trends, we take quite a bit of time to make sure that we are, in fact, aligning with other sources that we know to be true. And then there will be a measure we'll call share of mentions, which is a proxy for share of trips or stored transactions. We derive this through survey. Those two have a very high correlation. You can see that in measures have very high correlation. You can see that in prior webinars. So when I talk share, unless I specifically state otherwise, the share is always share of trips. It's not dollar share. In this survey, as compared to the other 4, we had to make some technical adjustments in the how we survey for where people shop, the outlets. So that what that did was change the magnitude of some of the responses versus the existing trends, but the trend itself did not change. If you have more questions on this, more than happy to ask. I just don't want to get too far into the weeds on a lot of these technical details. So today we're going to review the category trends. How are these 15 categories doing? If you've tuned into any of these webinars in the past, you know that our industry, and if you track the industry, you know it has been very sluggish. Does that continue? We'll look at the demographics, who are the most important consumers, deal preferences, where they shop, and what are their attitudes towards some of these on-trend concepts like organics and heavy online shopping and diet products. Something new that we've added here is comparing the US to the UK, particularly when we talk about online grocery potential and the potential of value grocery like Aldi and Lidl, and also general appeal of on-trend concepts. And there's a lot of insights we can gain to get a better feel for where are the trends in online grocery heading. Where are they heading for value, Aldi and Lidl? How much of a threat do they really present? 3 definitions here that have to do with how we define very heavy category buyers, heavy buyers of consumables overall, and then heavy deal users. And again, I can come back to that later if you have questions at the end. I don't want to, again, get bogged down because we have a lot to cover, so let's get into it. So one thing that's interesting is we really saw a turnaround in category trends. Look at all those categories that now the average number of purchases went up meaningfully, as in more than 5%. The other 3 were relatively flat, and particularly in yogurt and carb bev on a relative basis, those are definitely corroborated through other industry sources. Carb bev has had some real challenges. The soda tax has been one, just a general rejection, or not so much rejection, but people are switching more, shifting more toward just bottled water. And then yogurt has, most notably General Mills just declared a major reduction in revenue and profits because of weak yogurt sales, and that's really a category wide. So one thing to note here though, because this overall average is up 10%. Surveys consistently accentuate actual shifts in marketplace trends, meaning that I am not claiming, and this is where the corroboration comes in. So we know from other sources that the category is not growing anywhere near 10%. But what we do know is that there is a discernible shift in trend. We know that there's actually now that a meaningful uptick in demand, and we'll talk about how we know that later on. But this is important because the last 3 years our industry has had historically weak trends, and that looks to be changing, not only based on our survey, but then again we go back to other sources and say, can we in fact confirm that? As we dig into the particular segments, we see that who's the heavy buyers, because that's really a big part of it. They're about anywhere from 25 to 30% of the total based on what year you're talking about of number of buyers, and they're doing 60% or more of the sales. And you see this real big jump, first of all, from 23 to 31. That's the highest we've seen. So we've kept the definition of heavy buyers constant throughout these 5 surveys. Look how much we saw of a jump of households with kids, and look how important they are, particularly this year versus others where they were also very important relative to all these demographics. So everybody obsesses on the vaunted millennials. How do the 18 to 34s, what are they doing? Well, they're no more or less important than any other demographic group. They're right about the average, maybe a little bit above this year, but over time they've somewhat trended around the average. The major important segment in this industry, as it always has been, is households with kids, and somehow marketers and CPG companies seem to have forgotten that. We also see a jump in heavy Hispanic, but that correlates very highly to the jump in families with households. Why it's particularly pronounced with Hispanics is because they have a disproportionate amount of their consumer base that are young families. So they tend to skew younger, more younger kids. Then we looked at deal activity. So that's the level of heavy shopping in general. And so we see kind of across the board, so all the various demographics were up pretty much. Now we look at deal activity. And so we have overall, we have these active deal buyers, people that, do things like FSIs and actively cut out coupons and pursue deals. Passive deal tactics, which are EDLP and PVL. I just show up to the shelf and I get the deal. What we see as we compare year over year is there really isn't much change at all. We see a bit of a decline in heavy passive deal buyers, but that really is attributable to one tactic being bonus pack. Other than that, there's really not a whole lot of change in people seeking deals. What we had a few years ago, if you look at this, say this big increase in the number of light deal buyers, was this phenomenon called discouraged deal shoppers. And that pretty much has stabilized now. So we have close to about a quarter of all shoppers being heavy deal shoppers. And that's, they agree that they use 6 or more of these tactics that I'll show you in a minute regularly. So this is a fundamental human need. It's a fundamental part of shopping. Even the medium deal buyers are using 3 of these tactics. And yet we see these big CPG companies, ConAgra, Campbell's, General Mills, pulling way back on deal activity. And no surprise, their sales and their profits go down. And why is that? Because they don't understand the consumer and they don't understand where deals factor into the consumer decision process. Very, very important to them.
Hey, Kurt.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Can you move your navigation bar off your screen on the top right, so it's kind of on top of your presentation a little bit? Just move that across out of there, or minimize the orange button there.
You can see it?
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Don't just move it off. Thank you.
Okay. Huh. Okay. So then we look at, so why is this? Like, how do I know that? How do I know that deals translates to more shopping? Well, this is pretty conclusive here, and we've corroborated this with so many different data sources. So we're looking at light deal buyers all the way to heavy deal buyers, and what percent of those groups over the 5 years are also heavy buyers of consumables. And you see this very clear, unambiguous trend that the more deals I partake in, the heavier the more stuff I buy. And that dynamic is a bit more important for passive deal activity. And so that is kind of the root of why Lidl now is such an area of concern, because we know that kind of these EDLP and private label are a big driver in people buying more stuff. And so the retailers that can offer that will have a distinct advantage with consumers if the other high-low retailers aren't willing to play ball on some of the active deal tactics that they have traditionally been, excelled at. So here are those deal tactics, and I'm not going to go over them specifically again in the interest of time, but I'm comparing the total, which is in red. This is the 5-year trend versus kids, households with kids. And that's the most important demographic, as we've talked about. So the first thing I just want to isolate on the specific tactics. The most important active deal tactics is people that like to go to different stores that offer the best deal. That's about as active as I can be. I'm actively engaged in making my decision where I shop based on deals. That's almost half the people. So you say deals aren't important? Well, the consumers are telling us otherwise, and they have for the last 5 years. Circulars have been going down significantly. You can see how much they've dropped, particularly with kids with households. Same with FSI. So that doesn't bode well at all. So these newspaper-driven vehicles going down. Online coupon went down, but now it's gone up, and it's actually higher than FSI's for the first time we've tracked it. Now, why that's important is online coupons really don't work. I mean, it's like, it's just an absolute screaming into a dark cave as far as tactics. They're just so cheap to execute, and you get what you pay for. And we can talk about that later if there's interest. One of the key areas, well, and also before that, look how important EDLP is, far and away the most important. And again, EDLP retailers have a comparative advantage because this is the most important deal tactic that consumers look for in this sector. Look how important large sizes are to households with kids. So overall, not that important, but there is a major sector that is really interested in large sizes as a way to get value. But overall, kid households don't do that much more deal activity, deal pursuit than the overall. But you see that the millennials, the VMs, I call them for short, the vaunted millennials that the media obsesses over, significantly lower deal participation, particularly in the area, again, of circulars and FSI. So those trends are definitely going in the wrong direction, and they don't figure to get any better as more and more tech-savvy consumers come into the heavy shopping ages and starting to have kids. You see EDLP is less important to them, curiously enough, because they tend to have lower disposable incomes on average. And then larger sizes are more important, probably related to the fact that many of them do have kids. But it's really these circular and FSIs that kind of give us a glimpse into the future of where these vehicles are heading. And it's a somewhat grim future. Now let's talk about how consumers react to various trendy type concepts. Organics gets a lot of press, particularly with the whole Amazon Whole Foods deal, but in general, it's still a very niche category. It's 14% of the consumers say they regularly try to buy organic drinks and snacks. That's up substantially, so that's a meaningful increase. It's definitely going in the right direction, but that's still a very, very small percentage. And if you look at in-market data, you see that organics just always sells well below the mainstream products. I mean, where you get the advantage, or where retailers and manufacturers get the advantage, is it's highly incremental. And so a lot of research we've done also ancillary to that is that there's always do you want to get the best organic items in the mainstream set to get more traffic, or do you want to keep it where it is? And from all the research we've done and talking to other industries people as well, you want to keep it where it is. Having all organic products together at this point still seems the way to go, because the overall market is just so small, and those people love to kind of have multiple choices in multiple categories. So within a mainstream retailer, they need a separate organic set. When we look at diet and low-cal, not much change overall, but the interesting thing is how the age profile used to be, and even the year before in 2015, very strong as you get older. People were more caring about these diet products. Now we get the spike in the 45 to 54. And then finally, we ask about how do people consider their online shopping habits overall for anything. And again, very few people say they consider themselves heavy online shoppers, only 13%. Again, above last year at 10, so moving in a positive direction. But until that number gets meaningfully higher, you shouldn't expect online grocery to be that big. So that's the first step in, well, why is online grocery still so small, and why hasn't it taken off? Well, first thing is not that many people shop online for much of anything overall. And you can see a real strong age skew, younger jumped up big time. It's also the higher incomes kind of taken on kind of the profile of, I think, where the conventional wisdom lies, is that online shoppers tend to be much younger and much more affluent, and that certainly is bared out through this survey. So let's take a look at where people actually buy. So this is regular purchasing, and the way we define that is at least 6 or more times a year. That's a very low benchmark for talking about regular purchasing. The average number of purchases the shopper makes at any given food banner, a grocery banner, is about 26 times a year, 20 to 26. So that's about once every other week. So we're setting a really low threshold. So let's take a look at the changes. Well, we did see a noticeable decline in people shopping regularly at regular grocery. We also saw it at Target. We see it in the drug chains, and we saw it at Sam's. We saw some meaningful increases, although it doesn't look that meaningful. Online went from 11, 12 to 13, so 3 years of growth. But I mean, relatively speaking, it's still pretty small. You look at where it stands versus all of these other specific outlets. And one key thing to note is 98% of the adults in our survey said there was at least one of these options other than online that they shopped regularly. By contrast, only 13% of the people said they did so for online. So online just, I mean, still is so much smaller than brick and mortar grocery that it's, you know, it's not even a worthy conversation to see brick and mortars going away. Everybody does it, and they'll, you know, all evidence says they'll continue to do it. Now that said, there's some definite shifts in the specific banners where they are choosing to go. Walmart, dollar stores like Dollar General, Family Dollar, Dollar Tree, online grew, Costco, and discount grocery. So when we see the people that have lost brick and mortar, the traditional grocers, Target and CVS, online is really picking up only a little bit of that. The losses that these people are seeing in share has more to do with gains from you know, value-oriented channels. And where did we see just a little while ago? That value-oriented consumers, they made decisions of outlets based on the type of deals that were being offered, and the deals they prefer more often EDLP than anything else, but they like a variety of deals. They like a high-low and they like EDLP. That's why EDLP hybrid, parenthetically, tends to be the best retailer approach for maximizing sales. And this is probably the most prominent area where we were able to corroborate our survey with the trend that we see in the marketplace, primarily as we look at annual reports and who's up, who's down. The struggles at Target Grocery are well documented. The struggles with CVS front end well documented, as well as some of these, you know, Kroger, for example, since the last time we did our study, showed declining same-store sales 2 quarters in a row, which they hadn't done in 40+ quarters. So now let's drill into online grocery specifically. So to the left, we're looking at what percent buy at least once. And so you can see it's still the vast minority, not vast, but I mean a significant minority of people do it even once. So even though it grew from last year, 31 to 35, it's still saying 2/3 of the people don't buy online grocery. Then we said, well, what percent are buying regularly, 6 or more times a year? So the first 2 years we did the survey, we didn't break out pickup from delivery. And then you see the breakouts here where it's delivery only, pickup only, and then both options. And so you can see last year a lot of people were doing dual formats, but this year now there's definitely seems to be some kind of equilibrium on preference, or at least a movement toward those that prefer pickup, but those that prefer delivery. Delivery overall, if I add up the blue and the green, actually ticked down slightly. Generally flat. So the growth that we see in regular purchasing and online was really a function entirely of the pickup. And so here's those numbers there. And then we're going to talk about stated loyalty. So what that means is that our loyalty went from 39 to 38, essentially flat. So if I take this 12.2, divide it by 39%, or the 13.3, I'm sorry, the 12.2 divided by 31, or the 13.3 divided by 35. That's the stated loyalty. It's saying of the people that buy at least once, what percent of them buy regularly? That number has to be twice as what it is for this to be a viable, ongoing, profitable type of format. That loyalty just isn't going to cut it. There's gains, meaningful gains in penetration, but the gains really need to be made in loyalty because these are such high frequency categories we're talking about. And so you see all that slippage from, you know, getting any people to even buy 6 times. And remember, the industry norm is 20 to 26 times buying at any given outlet. So as we look at the specific domains where people are doing their online grocery shopping, here's the people that don't do any, but then you see this big jump in Amazon. A lot of it due to the whole kind of hype behind the Whole Foods deal, but also Amazon Prime penetration, and that's been pretty well announced, is going up. Walmart went up, Target went up. We see that also in their annual reports that they're doing quite well. These are some alarming declines in brick and mortar grocery, and it's kind of not any coincidence that you see that not a lot of retailers are talking about their, Kroger, for example, was noticeably coy about how their online business is going, even though almost all of these are starting to try and build up that infrastructure. Albertsons, it has, God knows, they have enough problems with their brick and mortar business. Jet made on the scene. So if you add up Jet and Walmart.com, you actually see that entity, Walmart overall, actually did quite well. We're really seeing Walmart, explode in non-food categories. This is certainly a meaningful improvement, but it's really when we did baby, when we did vitamins, we've done personal care. That's where we've just seen Walmart.com really and the Jet really prevail. And then you see these kind of traditional kind of pure play retailers that are still trying to kind of find their niche and establish a growing consumer base, at least as far as what's being reported by the people in the surveys. So now, where's online grocery? One way we can maybe get some, where's it heading? We can get some clues by comparing to the UK. And so the first thing I want to do is say, well, we can't really make any inferences unless we are relatively confident that the consumers are the same. Well, if we look at what products and categories they buy, they're pretty much the same. Overall, there's a little bit higher level of number of categories purchased in the US, and you can see where specifically they're different. But if I correlate these two, kind of a relative size of each, I get a very high correlation, 80%. If I do the same thing for very heavy buying of any given category, these are the people that say they buy a given category once a month, and this is may look kind of scattery to you, but that's actually an 83% correlation. So relatively speaking, the relative ones that are relatively high or low are consistent in the US as well as the UK. In fact, they have the same average number of categories where there's very heavy purchasing. So what this is some initial evidence that the consumers are much more similar than they are different. So if there's differences, then it must be a structural difference in kind of the supply chain or some other kind of market structure difference, not fundamentally the way the demand profile of those products are. And so when I look at the specific promotional vehicles, I see many of them are quite similar. Shopper card, rebates, bonus packs, large sizes. So these gaps really would then be due to either kind of basic preference differences. Shopping for deals and EDLP would be one, but EDLP is also a function of just more formats offering that. But these couponing, it just doesn't seem to be much of a British thing. They just don't seem to be into it. And maybe there's not as many options, probably, certainly Sunday coupons just may not be a thing. But you see how many are roughly similar to the, and also just general participation is very similar. The only one that's the US is meaningfully below, but not dramatically below, is private label. Now, why this is particularly important is there's a lot written on how big private label business is in the UK, and all these US retailers are trying to figure it out. Well, it's a very easy explanation. There's many, many categories where that's the only option. There just isn't a branded option out there. And so that is what kind of drives the higher private label share. And you say, oh, well, isn't that great? It's more margin. Well, you can then kind of get into some of the details, looking at the categories that have more or less brand selection. And you see there's a very clear correlation, and actually it's a causation. The more brands or categories that offer a selection do better than categories that don't. That's just consumers want variety as well as they want deals. That's kind of fundamental microeconomics 101. So you can see that the type of active deal activity, US much more actively engaged, but as far as these passive tactics, US and UK really no difference at all. And so again, more evidence that the consumers are more similar than they are different, and the differences are explained by factors other than demand-based factors. when we look at these various types of concepts, these on-trend concepts, again, very similar. We're looking at total US versus UK as well as the millennials, which tends to be an early warning system or a bellwether, and again, not much difference. So organics tends to be more popular in the US, but not dramatically so. And then all these others, diet products are a bit more popular in the UK, but consumers, again, more similar than they are different. So we get to a retail profile then that shows significant differences. So this is just the UK, and we're seeing percent of people that buy there regularly, and then we add up all those and create a share of mentions. And so we can see a couple things. First of all, we see value grocery combined is about 17 share. And that's well over half the people are buying in either Aldi or Lidl. We also see that online share is about an 8, and in the US, that number is lower than 4. So there's kind of some real structural differences here in the way consumers are shopping. Now, is that a demand-based preference, or could it be the fact that just there's many fewer formatting options, shopping format options? So there's limited club. I think there's only 16 Costco's in the whole country. There's no real mass merchandiser sector. There's no Meijer, there's no Walmart Supercenter really. I guess Tesco and Sainsbury and Asda has some bigger format, but that's more like a food drug combo, not so much like the Supercenter Hypermart. Natural food really doesn't exist, so there's not a kind of analog to Whole Foods in a big way, and then no dollar stores. That's a lot of less competition out there. There's not as many choices, particularly not as many value choices. So if you look at this, it is club, mass merchandiser, and dollar stores. Those are ways that consumers have said they like to get value, but those formats aren't available to them in any great numbers in the UK. So that, more than the actual demand, explains why these numbers are so much higher than the US. And let's benchmark how it does do versus the US. So here we're looking at who's buying regularly, US versus UK in these formats, and then we look at the actual share. So if I look at people that buy regularly online, you can see much higher purchasing online in the UK. Delivery is really explaining the difference. The pickup options don't seem to be there much of a difference. And then if I look at value grocery, you look at how much bigger it is in the UK, 53 versus 20%. And then that translates into much different share. So look at the share here, 17 versus 5.5 in the US. So you say, wow, there's so much more to go. Well, remember, there's not as much competition there. So the value share is even more disparate. Again, why is that? Because there's not a club channel to really account for the higher transaction sizes. So then we look at where do they shop, and then let's benchmark against some. So Amazon the actual difference in penetration isn't that much. So these are people that don't buy, and then Amazon bigger in the US and relatively bigger than other options. But Amazon is kind of just as no better than Asda or Tesco, or just slightly better than Sainsbury. See Ocado here, the next number 2 pure play retailer, and there's a lot of written about them. They actually aren't that big. I just saw a story actually today saying they're having some financial problems, which isn't a surprise given the such low share. But here's the differences now in penetration. You see the big differences in loyalty. And so that, so the loyalty and then the lack of competition is what gets the UK share so much higher. So you see it's 61 versus 38, and then the share is more than twice as much. So what can we conclude? Well, it looks like the turnaround in the industry is at hand, and we've corroborated that by looking at growth in median income, first time reported by the census data that we've had in the last several years, 4 or 5 years. And that is sales acceleration and market data we're seeing also. If we look at households with kids, they're the largest and most important demographic, and they're the one that's driving the growth, and you can see that with the kid-driven categories seeing some pretty big gains. If I look at promotions, minimal changes in activity, but the one thing that didn't change is it's still very important, a 5-year pattern of cause and effect. More deals, more sales. We've corroborated it extensively with multiple data sources. We do see a slow slide toward oblivion for circulars and FSIs, and you see that because the younger consumers are pretty much not reading newspapers, even getting those vehicles. The large size carry outsized importance to the household with kids. And then the EDLP is the most important deal tactic, and that's why value channels continue to be important. Organic, meaningful growth, but still very much niche. And very few people consider themselves heavy online shoppers, and that number needs to get much higher if online grocery is going to become a viable outlet. So the outlet shifts noted in the media also appear to be evident in the survey. Can you hold 1 second? I'm having some technical difficulties here. Hold on, guys. Okay, he's back, sorry. So the share declines we saw, grocery, drug, and Target, we see it in the survey, we see it in the media in the quarterly earnings. The gains in online, Dollar, Walmart, again, value food, those are all things we should be very familiar with and have seen. Click and collect made some major gains in the preferred format, but it's still delivery that rules in online grocery. But brick and mortar ain't going anywhere, folks. I mean, it's still 98% of the people like that. 13% of the people shop regularly online. So we have a long way to go before online starts to be the death of brick and mortar. Amazon saw the biggest growth, but Walmart, Target also saw big growth. This is a real, I mean, let me give you some context. We did baby in April. And we saw kind of the survey showed this just dramatic collapse in the category in general. And again, like I say, the survey tends to accentuate trends that are meaningful. But where we really saw the biggest drop was in the specialty channel of baby and Babies R Us, Toys R Us in particular. And what just happened in the last day is they declared bankruptcy. So it was really a drop in demand versus their heavy debt load that kind of sank those guys. So don't take this lightly if there's somebody on the omni-channel traditional grocers. These declines are meaningful and they need to be understood and addressed if you aspire to succeed in online grocery. And that, given the really poor profitability profile of online, that in and of itself is not a given that you do want to succeed, because there's a lot. I mean, that's going to be a long time before that gets figured out. Loyalty to online in general is very low, 38%. Didn't grow versus last year, and that needs to double before online really becomes online grocery becomes a formidable competitor. We are seeing online in vitamins and baby and personal care even. Some of these non-food categories are actually doing pretty well online and showing much better loyalty measures. So last year I said online was failing, and it was. Because we've seen some meaningful improvements and kind of seen some investments starting to drive demand, that I give the grade a D+. I mean, the problem with online grocery isn't more, supply chain and getting it there faster and drones and Uber and all that other, alchemy. It is the demand isn't there. and that needs to be addressed, and we do see some improvements there, so that's a good thing. Once that gets figured out, once there's critical mass, then the industry really needs to turn their attention to the whole supply side and getting this thing profitable. Because at the point now, it looks like almost every extra unit you sell means you're losing more money. So what do we know about the US versus UK? Well, the consumers are much more similar than they are different. We saw the same thing in Canada. And so there's a lot we can learn of our market, where it's headed, by looking at these other outlets, these other markets. So Canada also had a very big value grocery sector, actually even bigger than the UK. Category purchasing is similar. The preferences for all these on-trend topics are similar. The deal tactic preferences are similar, except when there's just availability issues, like for FSIs and circulars. Private label is only modestly more preferred in the UK, and so that really suggests there's not a fundamental difference in demand. Consumers prefer brands, although there's a healthy preference for private label as well. They prefer both. They have many different needs and desires, and just offering private label only is a way to limit sales. You can see the majority of people don't use private label, so that's an issue. Online share in the UK is at 8, and that's more than twice the US level of 3.6, but there's less competition in the UK. So it's not an apples to apples comparison, but loyalty is higher. Again, there's less options, but is there a difference? I don't know that answer, but that certainly would seem to need to be understood. Is there a difference in the shopping experience for the UK versus the US? And the UK is actually very close to the brick and mortar norm. Amazon is not the force in the UK it is in the US, and curiously, the omni-channel grocers do much better there than they do here. Again, the question is why? And that's something that's knowable. You just need to invest in the research to do it. So I would say that the shares at a 3.6 now, to get to a 5 share is a $40 billion market or category for online, and I say that's a stretch. There's a lot of competition. There's still a big loyalty gap that online grocers don't see much of a need to figure out. They're just all obsessed with all the different exotic ways they're going to get the product to you. So, that is kind of, you can use that. Let's even say that's the potential over the next 5 years. You can do some back of the envelope kind of calculation to say, what kind of investment am I willing to make to get to, to achieve that potential? But as you see, not a big number. So with that, again, thanks everybody, and I'll turn it over to Dustin and answer some questions.